Okay, it looks like it has started. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna screen share through a lot of this, so you guys don't have to look at my mug through the whole thing. I do, since I don't really have anyone else kind of monitoring things while I'm doing this, I'm gonna try to keep an eye on the chat for any questions, but I would strongly encourage you guys to just unmute and holler out if you have a question about anything. Checkers in particular, if you have something you want to add, I'd like this to be a discussion as well as a training so that everybody's on the same page going into the process here. So real quick to start us off, could you just drop something in the chat or unmute and let me know who here has not worked on the 1099 process through Hansman Webull before? Just want to make sure I've got my list up to date. Okay, I know there's at least one on here, so you guys either aren't listening or you can't hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Don. I'm not even seeing any live faces right now, so I have no idea what's happening. So, okay, so according to you guys, everybody's done this before, and I'm just giving you an update on any changes in the procedures and a run through of stuff as a refresher. Okay. All right, so a couple of kind of bigger changes for this year. As far as the forms themselves, there's really not much change at all. The 1099 NEC kicked in last year, so that is something that I think we all did a pretty good job transitioning over to that. That seemed to be pretty easy to understand the difference between the two forms. So really the variety or most of the changes that we have are just in the actual procedures themselves. So the first one is that we will be electronically filing the government copies of the forms that are prepared in 1099, etc. For the forms that are prepared through QuickBooks Desktop, those are going to be paper filed again this year, but again, we'll be e-filing the ones that are through 1099, etc. That does not really change the process much for you guys that are actually in this call, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that, just in case you hear and think, oh, what does that mean for me? Partners right now should be getting lists of all of the 1099s that fall under them. So hopefully they have been reaching out and we should start having them come in. I would suspect over the course of next week, we'll have a bunch of them coming in and then we're off to the races for that next 2 weeks, of course. The process for that, as it has been in the past, is that the partner should initiate the process when that first comes in and we have all the information. They're going to push that to me under to be assigned. And then I will be pushing that out to the individual preparers. So I will ask all of you, if you start to feel a little overwhelmed with what you've got on your list, please let me know. I'm going to kind of assume they're moving through the process. So I kind of run through, typically what I'll do is I'll just look at the preparers I've been assigning them to. And if say I haven't sent anything to Peter in 2 days, then I'm going to go ahead and send him a few more. And then, oh, it's been a few days since I sent something to Aaron, so I'll send him a few more. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at all, you need to let me know so I don't overload you with new ones. As far as other changes in the process, the other big one is they want us to try to clean things up as far as the time that this is in. It's one of those areas that we can barely justify billing for the amount of time we're spending on it. So we're hoping to just kind of make some of these procedures a little leaner this year. One of the main reasons we're going to do that is eliminating a little bit more of that background work when it's not necessary. So in the past, There have been situations where a client has sent us a list of information. We would go in and use that information as a guide, but we would still go into QuickBooks and make sure that they gave us all the information that we needed. We are not doing that this year. We are taking the list that they gave us and we're running with it. So if you get a list from a client, you are not expected to touch the QuickBooks file at all. You're supposed to use that list that the client gave us, period. The only time that would be an exception to that is if the partner specifically puts a note into the work stream to say that they want you to look at the QuickBooks file. Otherwise, don't delve into the QuickBooks, just use their list. Is that clear for everybody? I think that's probably actually the biggest change that affects you guys. Thank you, Robbie, for responding. Okay. Then I'm just gonna do a real quick reminder of kind of what falls on each form and that type of stuff. This should be just an overview and a refresher for everybody at this point then. So the main forms that we're going to be filing are the 1099 NEC. That's the non-employee compensation. The 1099 miscellaneous, which now is called miscellaneous information instead of miscellaneous income. And then we have a handful of 1099 dividends, interest, etc. A reminder that all of those 1099 forms get matched with a 1096, and that each different type of form has to have a separate 1096. So if you have a client that you're doing a div, an NEC, and a miscellaneous, you're going to have 3 different 1096s to go with that client. Each 1096 should have its own separate workstream task. So I'm going to take a second and share my screen and go over what these workstream tasks should be looking like. This is just one that I pulled up that I worked on last year, actually. So it's kind of fair looking. Give me 2 seconds to share this. Okay, so as you guys may recall, last year, virtually all of these were on XCM. Nothing was in Workstream with the exception of the ones that we were doing for the first time last year. So could someone, by the way, confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so that means that in theory, all of these have moved over from XCM, but there's some that I'm sure fell off the list. So that probably won't apply to most of you, but if you remember doing one last year, don't be afraid to ask, hey, did that come up? Or take a peek, see if it's in there. For any of the supervisors that are on the call, you guys may be a little bit more likely to notice SBA group. You're used to your clients, obviously. So if one of your clients that you're doing payroll or other bookkeeping type work for is not showing up somewhere, then that's something that you should go ahead and question. I would take a look out in Workstream, see if you can find the project first, and if you can't, then it probably needs to get set up. Also, as a side note for the SBA team, if you typically do the bookkeeping or the payroll for that client, the expectation is that you will be the starting point for that 1099. Does not necessarily mean you're going to be prepping the 1099, but you will be the starting point. So if, for example, it's someone we do payroll for, but that's all we ever do for them, we're not touching the regular file, there's no reason why we need to be within SBA. We need to be the one doing that 1099. So then it's going to depend very much on what everybody's schedules look like. I can easily pass that out to somebody else. QuickBooks Online, we run the reports out of QuickBooks Online and then we drop the data into 1099, et cetera, to be done. So what often happens with that, we'll have a couple preparers out of the tax arena that are going to be kind of prepped and ready to go with that QuickBooks knowledge. Otherwise, it's kind of on the SBA team for your clients to gather the information out of QuickBooks and then pass that along to the another member on the team in order to actually get that 1099 prepared. Again, that'll go through me because if anything gets actually assigned to you for preparation, it's supposed to go through me. The partners know that. They were not great about that last year. They followed suit probably 60% of the time, and then the rest of the time they just sent it along to somebody. I think there is one exception to that, Judy. I know a lot of yours were coming directly from Phil in the past. I suspect those have still come directly to you from Phil and Robin. They won't all come through me. But the rest of you, it should be coming from me, which hopefully means that I've also taken a moment to vet that project and make sure that if there's any notes that needed to be added or anything like that from the partner side, I will try to follow back with them and get that before I send it to you. But I still want you to take a look. So, couple things that you want to look at when you first come into here. So one is I would come down here and look at the form due dates. So this one she set up, but she just set it up for the 1096. That's great, but we want to know what 1099 form we're going to need to use as well. As a quick aside, the due dates on here, this is actually the federal filing due date. Hansman Weevil is still using January 31st as the deadline because the NECs are all due on January 31st. And additionally, we just don't want this to flow into the rest of tax season either. So we are still abiding by January 31st, regardless of what it tells you the due date is right here. So if you get one like this that only has the 1096, I need you to go up to open the project and then to form due dates. If you go to form due dates up here at the top, what forms are you looking for? 1099. Give me 2 seconds. I have this one in front of me and I think this was just for us. Yep. So this one is a 1099 NEC. Federal 1099 NEC. Done. You can see I added it there. Don't worry about the filing methods right now. I think admin will cover that on their end. If there's a change to that, I will send something out to the group. We'll have a Teams channel set up, so I'll send something out to the whole group about that if there's a change. So if you save and close that change to the project, and then come in here and refresh, it should show up. There you go. So when it leaves you and it goes to the checker, it should have the 1096 listed, and then it should have whichever 1099 filing goes with that 1096. If you need to have separate tasks set up for a 1099 NEC and a 1099 miscellaneous, and they didn't roll over that way, then please reach out like you normally would to set up a new task, and Jennifer or Leslie will get that set up.
Christine,
Yes.
you pointed out that the due date for the 1096 was shown as February 28th. Does that need to be changed in Workstream?
No, it's it's like jumping through fire trying to change that in there sometimes. And since we're just using January 31st as our deadline anyways, we've set up the report so it pulls miscellaneous returns in one like one view or one queue when we're looking things up. So the partners will still see those and I'll be tracking them in a different way. So the due date doesn't necessarily matter as it's listed here. So don't worry about trying to change that.
Thanks.
Okay, so a couple other things you want to add to this. So under the project notes, The prepare, I believe, are the notes that stick around. So that's where you're going to want to put in your additional notes. So there's a couple different things that you need to have in here. Give me 2 seconds to find my sheet here so I got it. Okay, so we want to know where the current year 1099s are located. That's like the preparation copy and the final copies and so on and so forth. So the document or engagement. Where, so current and prior year, you're going to need that. I also want to include in here the program that's used to actually prepare the 1099s. And the main reason we're adding that in there is so it will hopefully help with a little confusion on the, is this electronically filed or paper filed? So you're going to want basically QuickBooks Desktop or 1099, et cetera, are going to be the items you're going to put in for that. And then obviously any other things that need to go in here. I think it is fine to include those 3 items under one note. I don't think it's necessary to put in a whole bunch of extra notes, but that's up to you guys how you want to do it. So in this particular case, prepared in 1099, et cetera. Right. And now you guys can see how badly I type. Prior year located in document. Okay, under that project notes is where you should also see that note from a partner saying, yes, I want you to look at the QuickBooks file, because in this case, we believe the client might not have given us all the information. Okay, next item I want you to pay attention to is please do put your name in there under preparation if I have not put it in there for you. Just because that way further along in the process, if there's questions, it's just a little easier. It's easier for me also when I'm assigning them out. If I know this is a little bit more complicated, then I can see easily who did it last year, just because stuff is coming forward sometimes. So in the printed final line, for those that are doing them directly in QuickBooks Desktop, that should be you. Otherwise, that's going to be where they get moved to admin. But if it's QuickBooks Desktop, we want our name in there so it doesn't like get stuck in limbo somewhere because it didn't go to admin and it didn't come back to the preparer. So please, as the preparer, if you are doing it in QuickBooks Desktop, add your name in here so they know where it should be going. Last year that happened a lot. For some reason, things were stuck in limbo because, well, and I got a lot of questions from partners. Oh, this is done. Now what do I do? Delivery methods. So obviously we're going to either e-file or paper file the IRS copy, and then recipient copies. That depends on the client, whether or not they want us to mail them on their behalf or whether they're going to pick up or not. Partners are also supposed to be filling that out, but as the preparer, if there's nothing in there, feel free to reach back to the partner to ask that question. Okay, I think that covers what I needed to cover here on Workstream. Does anybody have any questions on that piece of this? Okay, so I do see that Anna asked and Dawn answered in the chat, but if anyone's not looking at that, just to reiterate, you should have a separate Workstream task for each type of 1099 because that 1096 is going to be basically the driver of each task. Having said that, you don't have to have a separate preparation task or packet. They can travel together, but they do need to, actually, I'm sorry, let me back up. Could someone remind me from last year, did we use separate packets as well as separate tasks?
From what I remember, we had combined only the NEC and the miscellaneous.
Okay.
All others were completely separate in their own separate packet.
Okay. Could a couple of the checkers kind of jump in and let me know, do you have thoughts one way or the other? Would it be easier for you to track if it's 2 separate packets? Or is it fine for it to be in the same packet?
I'm assuming that I'm going to be a checker, and
Yes,
I
Robbie, you
think
are a checker.
I think it's easier if they're separated.
Okay. All right, so when it's convenient, please separate them. If for some reason you're finding it difficult to separate them, I think it's important that you put a note in Workstream just to say there's also a 1099 miscellaneous for this vendor or something like that. In fact, I would probably put that in anyways. If you're doing multiple packets for one client, I would put a note in each one of those Workstream tasks so that way when it gets to admin and they're putting it together for the client, they're not sending out the NEC and then realize 2 days later there was miscellaneous and we've already thrown something out. So yeah, as Don just wrote in there, notate in both tasks so that Assembly is aware that there are multiple tasks for that client. Are we all on
I
board
agree
with
with
that?
Rob.
Sorry,
I
go ahead.
agree with Robbie that it is definitely better if we have a one-to-one relationship between the task in Workstream and a packet and document.
Okay.
And speaking of that, by the way, one thing that I ran into last year was several of these were actually saved in engagement rather than document. And I know that there's reasons for that because the SBA uses engagement a lot because of the easier way to organize information. Is it possible that to streamline this process, that at least that checking packet for the 1099 package could always be in document? Is it going to want to end up there anyway? Or does it need to stay in engagement? I mean, it can be an engagement, but if the last stage in the process, if they just saved that packet, copied it to document.
Hold on just a second, David. Could a couple of the SBA folks just jump in response to this question? My question first, though. When admin finishes their final copies and it's in engagement file client, do they put that in engagement or do they still put that in document? Okay, go ahead. Somebody from SBA.
So they put it wherever we prep it is where they save it. So if we want to decide now as a group for everyone, like we want it only in one program, so it makes it easier for the checkers, then that's completely up to them. I know that last year, if they had an engagement file and all of their stuff is saved in engagement, we used engagement. And we just notated it in the work paper notes where it was saved. And we did the same if it was saved in document. So, on our end, we prefer to do everything in engagement, of course, because we're a little biased on that. But we can certainly easily make that change to just have it all in document to streamline it.
So a couple of reasons that I like that idea is one, when we go into an engagement file, not knowing anything about the client and not being an SBA, sometimes it's hard to find where those files are located. I had to do a lot of digging around in folders to find where the 1099 info was saved sometimes. And then the other thing is I just end up with a whole stream of clients that I've synced to my local file room for looking at 1099 info that I don't really need to keep in my file room. And then it just builds up.
I know it's really important, and this is one of the things when we were training people last year, we stressed how important it was for notes and making sure that it was complete detail where it's saved, like step for step. So like when I had done mine, I literally said 2020 engagement binder, such and such folder, like each like step for step direction on where to follow to get it. But if we put it in document, it does streamline as far as having to give less instruction, but we still need some type of detailed instruction, even if we're all using document for assembly, because they are going to need to know what it's named, how it's named, like how many tasks it is. So either way, we still have to make sure that we're updating the notes and with a lot of detail. More detail is better than not enough.
If we save everything in document, is it a problem once everything is finalized to then move it to engagement? Because we do save everything in engagement, and for a neater process, we would want those 1099s to be in engagement eventually. So if we do decide to prepare and finalize everything through document, would it be an issue once it's finalized to move it then over to engagement also?
It's not an issue. It's
I-
just,
my qu-
it's going to add a little bit of extra work to someone no matter what. So, you know, neither one of those is difficult. We just need to make a decision, I think, on one or the other. I do think it makes sense to just go ahead and make a choice one way or the other now.
Hey, Christina,
Yeah.
I'm looking at the files and document for some of the SBA, and they do look like they've been saving them there as well. So I
Okay.
think,
Yeah, I think last year was the first year that we moved some of them completely to engagement. So most of the history is definitely in document. So
well, like
to me,
I just looked
document
at like
does make sense.
2020, so like Duck Farm, Valley Road, Thai Fresh, like those SBA clients, they have them in both. One doesn't though. One has like Hansman Weeble copy, but the client copy's not there. So, I mean,
Okay.
maybe
So
we
let's,
just double check to make sure so we are consistent, but.
yeah, let's just plan on doing them through document.
I have a question about it logistically. So I know with payroll, there are a lot of different versions of files before the final gets done. And so those are all in engagement in that annual payroll folder. With 1099s, we're not doing that, right? We might have a checkers copy, but once it gets finalized, that one gets deleted. I guess, or there's a preparer and a final and that's it. So really we're just looking at 2 PDFs that end up in document. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's the preparer file and then the final.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, there may be a separate file for the client copies, you know, once you get into the admin side of it, but as far as what we're looking at, yeah.
Okay.
Our final packet is hard copies, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of PDFs going around after it goes through checking after the preparation, because you're actually printing them onto hard paper from QuickBooks Desktop. So are they wanting, or should we scan those in, or is that still part of Assembly's process? We print the hard copy, we send it down to them to fully be assembled, envelopes put on, and they scan in everything before they put them in envelopes?
I will confirm that with them, but I believe that's part of their process. I'm making a note right now so that I don't forget to confirm. Okay, so we have deemed it so that they will be in document. You don't have to move last year's though. Can we just not worry about last year's? Say where it is and be incredibly clear on what folder and engagement if need be. And then that way we completely remove the problem for the next year. But I know otherwise you got to open it, you got to save it on your O drive, and then you got to, like, it does take a few extra steps to get them over there.
Can't you just move it directly from engagement to document within engagement? In other words, at the same time you open it, you just save that
Can you?
last year's packet to.
I never seem to have any luck with
I know
that.
you can go the other direction.
Right,
Yeah.
but you can't do it. Engagement doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It doesn't.
Vanessa
play quite as
said in the chat that it does.
Well,
I don't know.
I agree with Christine. We don't want to make a whole lot of time and energy with the prior year. So just make sure we're putting in good notes where prior year and current year are. And that way, you know, again, you got to be comfortable using both document and engagement. So if one's in one, you know, don't make a big deal out of that. We just need to get them out. We've got hundreds of these to do. So think make
Yeah, so this
everybody's
year's
life easier.
Yep.
Just by keeping a good trail of where it's at.
And
Thank
this
you,
year we'll start-
Kendra.
So this year we'll start saving them in document. Don't move where last year's file is. If it's in engagement, please Do we super clear it's in this engagement file, in this folder, in this folder, in this folder, until you get to exactly where it is and the file name, so that it's incredibly easy for whoever's checking and reviewing to be able to access that. And since you are supposed to be pulling them up yourself while you're doing the current year packet, it shouldn't be a big deal to know exactly where it is. Okay. Don has a good point to notate if there's corrected 1099s done. That's a really good idea to include that in the work stream as well. Because those 1099s, sometimes we have multiple 1099 packages, first of all, where we've missed some and we add some new ones. And then there's other ones where we have to make a change to an address or a name or a identification number or something like that. So if there are corrected 1099s that were prepared, it is good to look at those because you don't want to compare your current year package to a incorrect package from the prior period. I disagree with you, David. It will save time this year, and next year everything will be in document again. So you've got 1 year where you got to spend a little bit of extra time. So on the engagement side, by the way, you should make it a practice when you push it out to review to the partner after you've checked the file. You should just remove that from your local file room anyways. Believe me, I understand that with all the payroll returns, I end up with 45 of them in there and I can't find anything, and then I have to go through and clear them all out. So I know it's a pain. If you're not doing it daily, then just at the end of the week, just go through and wipe out whatever you've already passed along. Okay. So 1099s in general, there's no changes as far as who should be getting a 1099 and who should not. Again, remember, this is for services. It is not for the purchase of supplies. It's not for materials, so on and so forth. If the client did not split them out and it's something that is typically service, if you have a plumber come in and he does work and he didn't separate out the materials on his invoice, then he gets a 1099 for the invoice, period. We're not going to chase down how much of this should be materials, how much shouldn't, so on and so forth. Things paid with a credit card have already been picked up on a 1099K, so those do not need to be included. If you can't tell, just include it. Don't worry about it, just include it. Don't waste the extra time. Corporations, with the exception of legal services, corporations are not going to get a 1099. Remember that is not just anyone that says Inc. That is also LLCs that are taxed as a corporation. I know sometimes it's really hard to tell without doing a lot of extra digging whether or not they are listed as or taxed as a partnership or as a corporation. So the 1099 database, which is in this folder, and there's a lot of information in here, but it's not all fully up to date. It will be hopefully by the end of this weekend. So you can access any of this starting next week for more information as well. But this 1099 database is an Excel file that we maintain that has the information directly off the W-9s. That's a really quick search to just go in there and use the find feature. Robbie, I see your note. I'll circle back in a second. Actually, I'll circle back right now because I forgot what I was talking about. So what I had said about the supplies is if you have an invoice from a service contractor, somebody that you pay for services, and that may include supplies, a lot of times that's going to be your contractors, your repairs and maintenance type work. There's usually some supply component within that because they're usually replacing something. And then there's also the labor part, right? And the labor part technically is the 1099 piece, but unless it's incredibly clear and they've already split it out, we are not worrying about that at all. We're just going to take the full amount of the invoice if they have included it as a service invoice. Now, if they've separated it and they've put it into supplies or a materials account, then we assume that's what it is. But if they've put it into repairs and maintenance and it's plumbing, it's gonna get a 1099 as plumbing, assuming of course that they're not a corporation. Okay, so thank you, Kendrick. The 1099 database is a good place to look to see whether or not they should be receiving a 1099. And that will differentiate for those ones that we know whether it's an LLC that's corporate or partnership. If it is a new vendor, I would also recommend that you look in there. And as Don noted, as you get W-9 forms, so new vendors where you have new W-9s should be included in the packet, but as you get those, also forward those to Kendrick, and that spreadsheet will be updated. Kendrick, you may not be the one that's updating the spreadsheet through this whole process, but we're going to start with them coming to you and we'll figure it out from there. There are other sources to find that information, but in general, it's better to send them a 1099 and they didn't need it than to not send them a 1099. On occasion, they'll send us something and say, oh, wait, here's my W-9. I wasn't supposed to get one. Please correct it. So then we do a corrected one and show it as 0 and get that into the database. But for now, please don't spend hours and hours running around in circles trying to figure out whether or not they should get one or they should not. If it's an LLC and we have nothing telling us otherwise, just do the 1099. Okay. Kendra, are there any other major inefficiencies that I haven't covered?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, I thought that was the stuff that we had talked about. So, okay, I know I have really barely talked about what goes on a 1099 other than that supplies versus services. So just a couple of things in specific that I want to go over. One is legal. So if you look at the instructions for the 1099 forms, the miscellaneous and the NEC both talk about legal fees. The differentiation is that legal services, so when you pay an attorney to do his work as an attorney, that's going to go on Form NEC because that is truly a service that you are paying for. The attorney payments, proceeds paid to an attorney is what it's called, that go on 1099 miscellaneous is when you're in a situation where you're paying some sort of settlement. So if you are paying the attorney and they are taking that money and shifting it out to whoever else it may need to go to, in the case of a settlement, you are going to take the full amount you paid them related to that settlement and put it on the 1099 miscellaneous. Now, some of that settlement is going to go to whoever third party you have. Some of that is going to be their, you know, their 10%, or I'm giving them too much credit, 40%, whatever it may be. We don't care. If it's paid related to a settlement, it goes on 1099 miscellaneous. Otherwise, attorney fees go on NEC. The other thing with attorneys that's different is legal fees need to get picked up no matter what form of organization they are. So if it's a corporation and you're paying legal fees to them, you still send a 1099. Is that clear? Okay. Thanks, Don. Okay, so the other ones, there's not really any changes to the other ones. I know we always have some questions where things are kind of on the line. We're not 100% sure whether or not they should be included. Oh, actually, rent's another one I'll go over real quick. Rent paid to an owner of a building or a company that owns a building always needs to get a 1099. Obviously, this is one obviously where you have the corporation versus non-corporation in there. But if it's the owner of the building that you're paying rent to, then they are gonna get a 1099. If you are paying it to a property manager and you know for sure that it's a property manager, there is no need to pay the 1099 or to send the 1099. If you are not sure, send the 1099 anyway. You might be seeing a theme here. If you're not sure, send the 1099 anyway. That's pretty much where we're at on that. Rentals also, equipment rentals qualify for 1099s. So some of those you're gonna have, you know, your copier, right? You're gonna pay for the lease, and some of that's gonna be rental, and some of that's gonna be maintenance, and so on and so forth. So you don't need to worry about splitting that out. It's all gonna be included anyways. If they do give you a separation, then put the rental on miscellaneous, put the service piece on the NEC. Otherwise, just use your judgment as long as it's getting reported. Don, you had a question? Oh, okay. Any other questions or gray areas that you guys can think of that you've dealt with over the last, you know, couple of years or whatever that you want to kind of throw out there right now? I don't see anything. Okay. I am going to share my screen again. Give me 2 seconds again, please. I'm going to move everything around a little bit when I'm sharing my screen. So. I'm going to just show you guys part of a packet. So your packet, when you put it together, and this will be very clearly listed in the instructions that will be updated by the end of the weekend. Sorry, I'm trying to find where I wrote it down and I have it in front of me. Okay, your packet should have, this is just for a basic 1099, et cetera, no QuickBooks involved. You're gonna have the HW 129. There is already a copy of that here in that 1099 resources folder that you can easily pull up and tweak accordingly. I've already filled in a couple of the boxes on those for you. So I've already filled in the end of year with an X. The period end, I've already put in 12/31/2021. I think I dropped all of these in location. This is another place where it's a good idea to drop in some of that stuff that you put on the work stream. But if it's in work stream, I'm not super concerned about whether or not it's on this page, as long as it's in work stream and it's clear. So, but you can see last year here, I put the 1099s were saved in document for 2020. There was nothing for 2019. The next page in your packet for this variety is going to be your 1096. These again are last year's forms, but there's very little change to the forms this year. Remember, no commas should be showing up on this 1099, et cetera, should be set up correctly in order to do that. We do want things to be all in caps. You can do that as a 1099, et cetera setting, or you can just throw on your caps lock. Having said that, if it gets to you in review and it's in lowercase, we're not going to stop the whole process and start over again just to make sure it's in caps. Once again, that's an efficiency thing. So then your 1099s themselves. And then behind that, you are going to have any additional information that we need. So in this case, it's going to be, for example, here's the information related to the client that we need to have in there. And then we also need to have the details that back up the numbers that are in there as well. And where necessary, the information for the vendors. This one's HW, so there's not quite as much in there for the vendors. I need to confirm exactly where the fees are going to land, but I'm assuming it'll be in the same place as it has been in the past. I will include that in the packet and also put a note into our channel on the Teams when I know exactly where you're going to find those in there so that you can access those pretty easily. It's usually just one file, and I think it's in maybe in the 411 folder and document. You can go in there pretty easily again and just do a search feature for your client ID, and you should be able to find very easily what we paid them. That is a reminder that if you're doing a 1099 packet for someone, you will almost 100% definitely need to do a 1099 for Hansman Weevil, because we should never be doing work for a client where we are not getting at least $600. That's way below our minimums. So that is, that's what a packet looks like. So the QuickBooks related packages are going to be more entailed because there's additional reports that need to go in when we're doing the QuickBooks packages. But for most of you, you should be able to just have your packet put together like that. So it's your top page, your 1096, your 1099s, and then backup. Any questions on how to put the packet together? Okay, excellent. All right, we're gonna go over the QuickBooks stuff and the 1099s, etc. stuff a little bit more in a couple minutes. Just double checking my notes here to make sure I don't see anything else related to the packets themselves. Okay, checkers that are on here. And Kendra, do you guys have anything else to add to what I've already gone over?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you, Kendra. All right, I will move forward then. As I said, we're going to go through the QuickBooks policies a little bit more. Once again, the theme that we're trying to go with here is as efficient as we can possibly make it. So when you are preparing the packet and you have your 50 pages worth of QuickBooks transactional data, think about how long it's going to take for the checker to go through all of that, for the partner to go through all of that, and how hard that's going to be. So what we want to do is we want to streamline the reports as much as we can so that there's a comfort level that the 1099s are being issued for the items they need to be issued for, but not so much that we're slowing down the whole process. So please keep that in mind, like always as you're putting, and this is just in general, right? Whether you're doing 1099s or taxes or audit work or whatever it may be, you want to make it as easy for the reviewer as possible. So just keep that in mind. You know, when you're putting together the QuickBooks data, for example, and you're putting it into the file, you want to put your most summarized information first. There may be additional stuff in the back to back it up, but the checker shouldn't necessarily have to go into those deep, dark recesses of your packet in order to find that information. It should still be summarized up in the front as much as possible. Checkers. That list with all those vendors is often necessary for some of our QuickBooks clients because they don't understand how to mark someone as a 1099 vendor. So we have to pull data by vendor or by account to be able to see who's there and who's not. You can see Robbie's comment here that bookmarks help. That is correct. Definitely throw bookmarks into there. It's easy to do if you're putting your packet if you're doing your pieces to your packet and then you put it all together, just name them a little something different so it's more and more obvious for those checkers where to find the information. So anyway, so the checkers, when you get back to that list of here's all the transaction type stuff, the pertinent information should be highlighted. The rest of it, there's no need to do a deep dive. Glance over it, make sure nothing jumps out at you. And if it doesn't, we're going to trust that our preparers know what they're doing. Everybody that is preparing has had experience with 1099s in the past. So. Okay. If there are no other comments or questions, oh, go ahead, David.
Yeah. So that's always been the biggest challenge for me when checking these is when you get that 200-page packet of PDF and it's got all these reports from QuickBooks. Exactly what level of responsibility do I have to ensure that the preparer has not missed anything and the stuff they're included is correctly included? In order to do that to where I feel like I could say when I pass it on to the next level, they've got all the 1099s they're supposed to have. That's a lot for those. What's the level of responsibility there?
Kendra, do you want to address that? Being a partner and having the final sign off on some of those packets?
Well, I'm going to say a lot of times I doubt partners look at them in much detail. So they are putting their faith in the preparer and the checkers to do it. The QuickBooks ones are hard because there are so much. I think you scan them through to make sure they're logical, because hopefully the preparer's gone through that list and they're saying which ones are NA and which ones are applicable. So if you clearly see a legal service when you're scanning through it and you know that's a service and they missed it, that's the kind of thing you'll be double checking. The other one, like I would say, is if you're scanning through it again, you shouldn't be spending a huge amount of time on it. But like, you know, one of the obvious ones that runs through is like Christine mentioned, if you're using a contractor and you're paying the contractor for labor and materials, when they run their report, it tells you which account is labor and materials. So, you know, those are kind of things you don't want to issue a 1099 for materials. So that's where the checkers, I think, adds the value. It's just to double check that we're not issuing a 1099 for somebody that went to some category that's not, you know, it's not a service. And if you don't know, then you should just, you know, maybe flag it for the preparer just to ask before you spend a lot of time trying to hunt or figure out what that vendor does. Sometimes the person doing the work will know what that vendor does easily. So just ask the question and send it back, or call the person just to say, hey, if you have one that you're not sure about.
Okay, I agree with everything Kendra just said there. I think that's a good approach to it. So it's definitely a high level rather than a deep dive down into that. Definitely flip through it, make sure it looks reasonable, but you don't have to get into the weeds on it. This year's preparers that will be accessing QuickBooks, we're gonna try to limit that. So obviously the SBA team is working with QuickBooks all the time. They are gonna have a good knowledge of their vendors. So the chances of them missing one that needs a 1099 are pretty rare, because in many cases, they're the ones that are actually putting in those bills. So they know exactly which vendors are used for which items, so on and so forth. Julie and Alan both have a fairly significant amount of QuickBooks experience at this point, and both of them will also be doing some QuickBooks Desktop, or probably more like the QBO side of that. The majority of the preparers, if you don't have a lot of QuickBooks experience, you are not really going to be getting too many of those where you have to touch the QuickBooks, which I think will also hopefully make it a little easier for the checkers. I mean, if you're looking at a preparer and you're saying, oh, you know what, they're kind of brand new, then that's the area where you're going to have to look in more detail, right? But we're trying to keep the QuickBooks related ones with our most senior preparers or our preparers that are most familiar with QuickBooks in order to kind of just to make that a little easier for everybody. Okay, Robbie, I see your question about the checklist for checkers. There is not something like that set up right now. I can try when I'm going through and doing this.
I was
Updating.
really not looking so much for a formal, but maybe just a list of stuff to just say, hey, we want to be efficient too. So
Right.
what
I
do we
mean,
focus on?
basically, at the end of the day, think about the things that are can be an issue if we get them wrong, right? So obviously, we want to make sure that all of the company that we're doing preparing the 1099s for, right? We want to make sure all of their information is correct. So we want to make sure the address is correct. We want to make sure the phone numbers are correct. You know, make sure there's not obvious misspellings there. Identification numbers, like all of that type of stuff, we definitely want to make sure is correct. We want to make sure the dollar amounts are accurate. Having said that, there is a de minimis within these 1099s in general. I read it last night. I believe it was $100. So if somebody transposed a number and it makes a like $15 difference, I don't think it's worth it for anyone to go back and try to fix $15. Kendra, feel free to tell me I'm crazy. But you do want to make sure the numbers are accurate. You know, I mean, if there's a little tiny difference like that, I'm not too worried about it. But in general, you're checking the numbers, you're checking the identification. The other thing that you need to double check is make sure that the form of the identification number matches with whoever is listed as the payee on the payee. The recipient, we'll go with recipient. You want to make sure that the form of that identification number matches the name that is listed under the recipient. So if they are a sole proprietor and we're working with their social security number, or a single member LLC and we're working with a social security number, then that's the name that needs to be listed. The DBA or the company name can be listed below, but the first line item needs to match. So if all we have is an EIN and we don't have a social security number, then we need to have a company name in there to match with that rather than an individual's name. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So those are kind of your biggest things. I mean, at some point, how pretty it looks and that type of stuff, that's not really adding too much value to the packet. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. That's why I was saying if there's some lowercase words in there or whatever. Obviously, we don't want to look like slobs, but consider whether or not it really makes sense to worry about fixing it.
Yeah. So I think when you update the procedures, Christine, that'll have a lot of, if you haven't been involved in the process or haven't reviewed it, that'll have some of that detail for you, Robbie. So once she's got it updated, I encourage everybody just to review it, make sure it's updated. Carrie Bill updates kind of the procedures for the 1099, et cetera program as well. So that'll be there for you. But it kind of covers those highlights. Again, like Christine said, we want it professional. We want to issue what we need to, you know, we don't want to belabor it. But it is important to get it right too. They're, you know, making sure we're getting as right as we can. So just be cognizant in that. And, you know, again, when in doubt, issue it. As Christine said, if you're not sure, it doesn't hurt to issue one. In worst case, we can always pull it at the end if the partner says, no, we don't need one. So again, just try to add value to the process, and like sometimes just pick up the phone is the easiest way to double check if you have a question on something.
Okay. All right, so that's the basics that I wanted to cover. That actually took longer than I expected. So I will ask if any of the checkers have anything else they want to specifically mention, discuss, or have questions about? And if not, then if you are not preparing, you can drop off the call if you want to, because we're going to go into some slightly more transactional type things now. So like actually going through 1099, et cetera, in QuickBooks.
Do we know whether we're preparing or not? Like last year, I think I did
I'm
Ducks
sorry.
and
Oh,
Rayburn's.
here, let me give you the list, guys. So our preparers this year, we have Julie, Peter, Aaron, Alan, Mark McCutcheon, Joe, Judy, and the SBA team will all be on as preparers. Our checkers this year are Amber, Josh, David, Robbie, and Taylor. So if you are on the checking list, you are welcome to drop off now if you want. You can stick around if you want to too, but you're not going to learn too much more that you need. Bye, David. Okay. I am gonna share my screen and super quickly just walk through a little bit on 1099, et cetera. And then Becca is gonna walk us through some QBO procedures. I don't think we're gonna have time to get to the desktop procedures. So those of you that actually end up doing some where you need to touch desktop, I would ask that you reach out to me if one of those lands in your lap. Obviously the SBA team already knows how to do the desktop. So I think there's only a couple of you that might actually affect. So, so since we probably won't be able to fit it into today, we can just do some specialized training walking you through those reports. So I'm gonna try to blow through these 1099, et cetera, procedures here. And this is all in a document as well. It's actually the beginning portion of this document that I did here. You can see there's lots of detailed instructions here. I worked on this during the year last year because I was finding that it didn't seem to have a lot of detail in there about how to actually get the information into 1099, et cetera. So this is going to be a really good source for you. Right now it's out there as a separate document, and it's also going to be included under the bigger file, which will be that 1099 issuance update or whatever. So first things first, let me get the screens all shared up again. This is not the screen I thought I was pulling over, so give me another second. Okay, so when you need to get into 1099, et cetera, it should be out there, the 2021 program for everyone. However, you probably aren't going to see it here unless you've added it. I have, but if you haven't yet, you're going to need to go into all. And there will be a folder for 1099, et cetera. And then I just double clicked when I wasn't supposed to, but we're going to pretend I didn't. And then just click on the 1099, et cetera, for 2021. Obviously, you can go in there through your settings and put that on your shortcuts or on your favorites as well. So I just wanted to show you where to go to get to that. And I opened up 1099, et cetera, earlier. So when you first open it up, it is going to ask if you want to check for updates. That is done on the back end, so you do not need to check for updates. You can just bypass that, just say no. Just say no. And then once you get in here, you're going to need to select a user. You should, it's just in there automatically, usually with case name. Every time I've gone in, I think it's been there, but make sure that your user is listed as SYS, the system. If you are already using the program, you don't need to go back in and change that because that stays the way it is as you move forward in the program. And next time you open it, that shouldn't change. The first time you open the program for 2021, just confirm that that is correct. Okay, so then you're going to click on this W-2 1099 forms filer. That's going to pull up your directory. These should all be in here by client number. So, I think you can look by client number. Sometimes you can look by name as well, but client number is usually going to be the better way to go. This is the one in the instructions, so I'm just going to hit that one. So click OK. That'll open it up. So if you need to set up a new payer, that's not difficult to do. We can walk you through that. So just holler to me if you need instructions on how to do that, although it should also be in that document. So from the forms menu here, that's where you're going to start completing your forms. You can see last year they had a miscellaneous and an NEC. So that's how you're going to get in there. Backup pair, we usually hit no. Don't know why this is ridiculously shaped right now, but that's what it looks like. So basically you get in here and this is the actual payer information at the top. You guys have all seen these before. What you're really going to be focusing on more is the recipient information down here, right? So there's the identification number, name, address, so on and so forth. There's your boxes for you to type in the dollar amounts. Obviously, it's not going to be 50. 600 or more to need to get a 1099. One thing you want to keep an eye out for is this bottom. See how this says omitted down here in red? And I realize that may be kind of small with the screen share, but you can click that to toggle one way or the other. So if it says omitted, then that means you're not doing a 1099 for them this year. If it says omit, that means you are. Okay. And we use that so that we don't have to delete a vendor year after year after year. You can still keep them in the file. So that's why we want to use that and omit them. Last year we didn't have anything in here and they were omitted. You can click next, it'll bring you to the next record. So before you add a new vendor to a client, you're going to want to go through all of the records that are in here and make sure that they're not already there. If you need to add somebody, then you click add record. Also make sure obviously that this information is correct. If it's not, there's instructions on how to change those as well. That's pretty clear in here, so I don't see a whole lot of value added in running you through that because I think QBO is probably the trickiest part. I am just going to go back and throw something in here under Hanson Legal. Okay. The part that tends to get missed on this is where we actually managed to get it to the 1096. So once you've gone through and you've updated all of these records the way you want to, that's when you're going to need to jump everything over to the 1096. And I have not done this yet this year, so I apologize for that. You can also print directly from here. You know what, Becca, I'm going to have you take over while I just double check and make sure I've got the correct instructions on this because I don't want to waste anybody's time while I am doing that incorrectly. I'll show you the jump to the 1096 when Becca is finished right before we stop at noon. Sorry about that. Becca, you
Yes.
ready?
Yes.
Okay. You can go ahead and screen share, and she's going to walk us through the QBO instructions because I think that's where more of you are going to need to pull some information. And we've made a little bit of change to the reports that we need to run because we realized last year that the reports that we had been running were not picking up some information that we needed in order to make sure we had enough coverage on this. So go ahead, Becca. I'm passed to you at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if someone can just let me know when you can see.
You're good.
Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to go over is the report that we need to run in order to review who needs to be receiving a 1099. And that's going to be a transaction detail report. So you're just going to go into your report section. And you can go down to your account for my accountant reports, and we're going to run the transaction detail by account. Once we're in here, we want to change our dates. You can just drop this down and change it to last year. We want to change our accounting method to cash, but we also want to change our group by to vendor. Go ahead and click Run Report. And then we want to come up here and click Customize. And then we're going to change our columns. And we want to make sure, sorry about that. We want to make sure that we have our date selected, our transaction type. We don't really need that number. We don't need the name because we already have the vendor name. We want to make sure to include the memo and description. We want to make sure to include the split, which will be the account the split account. Include our amount, and we don't need the balance because it's going to balance it for us. Then we're going to scroll down to the filter section. And we're going to select account. And in the account filter dropdown, we're going to come down here and select all. Make sure to come down and actually put a check mark in this select all option. Then we're going to actually choose the distribution account filter also. And then in this filter dropdown, we're going to choose all bank accounts as the filter. And then once we have those two filters selected, we can go ahead and run the report. And I'm just in a test account right now, so we're not going to get a lot of detailed information, but you can see it totals everything for us by vendor. And this is the report that you want to actually print. And you
I have
can
a question.
Yes.
So by those selections, because we chose bank accounts, that's what removed the credit card transactions.
You're exactly right.
So if say, for example, there was a bill payment that was paid by credit card, not by check, that wouldn't show up on this report either, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So once you have this report reviewed and you have determined which vendors needs to receive a 1099, then you're going to go ahead and prepare your 1099s. There's a couple of ways you could get there, but the easiest is to go to expenses and click on your vendors tab. Before I move further though, did anyone have any questions about how to get, how to run that report? Okay. So once you're in your vendors tab, you're going to click on prepare 1099s.
Becca, I'm going to jump in for 2 seconds. This is also going to be part of that packet with some screenshots and kind of a walkthrough of this process. I just know for a lot of people, it's easier to remember it if you see it visually.
Right. And then you will click Let's Get Started. Of course, make sure all this information is completed, and I'll have to put something in here. Account. And then you'll just click Next. And then this is where this next step is where you're going to choose, you're going to categorize your payments. It's basically you're mapping your account. So if you're going to have your 1099 NEC, if you know you're going to have both 1099 NEC or 1099 miscellaneous, any type of payments that you've paid out to the vendors or that the client's paid out to the vendors, you can go through here and click and map the actual accounts to. It's just going to depend on what you need for that particular client. Then you're going to go through and map your particular accounts that you need. And I think the account that I need is this one, and there's another one that I will show you. If I don't select it, I'll show you a scenario that you may actually run into here in just a moment. So once you have all of your accounts mapped, you're going to click Next. So you'll review all of your contractor information on this screen. This will bring over all of your contractor information, all your vendor information.
And the only ones that'll show up in this list are ones that are marked as 1099 recipients, right?
Yes.
So in like prior years, we didn't use QuickBooks Online. So any of our QuickBooks Online clients, we put into 1099, et cetera. So if you're working on one and you know they have QuickBooks Online, you're going to have to look in et cetera and pull that vendor information and enter it into QuickBooks Online, most likely, their EIN, addresses, and mark them as a 1099 vendor, most likely.
Dawn, we are still, if we're using QBO, we are still doing it in 1099, et cetera.
Okay.
But yes, we'll need to have enough information in QBO for it to recognize that it needs to be included. Becca, will we be printing a report with this contractor info so that there's something easy for the checkers to follow up on to see those names and addresses and stuff?
Yeah, as soon as we finish preparing this, there will be another report that will be processing or printing after this. And I'll go through the steps also here.
Great. And we got 10 minutes. Sorry to leave you with so little time.
Okay. So after you review everything, you'll go to Next. So here is where the information is going to come through. You're going to check all of your payment information. You can print this payment information sheet. It's not really the actual report that I'm talking about, but once you get to this screen, you'll just click Save and Finish Later. And you don't want to move further from that. But as Dawn was talking about, prior to starting this prepare 1099s, if you have vendors, vendor information that needs to be put into QuickBooks Online from 1099, et cetera, you would have to come in here into the vendor profile if the vendors are the vendors in here, and you would click on the vendor and you would click edit, and you would need to enter their information and make sure that this track payments for 1099 check boxes checked off, and you would need to enter either their EIN or social security number in this box. Make sure their address, company, first and last name, all of their detailed information is completed. And save that. Once you've completed the 1099 wizard, then you would need to go back and run another summarized report for the checkers. And that report is in your report center. And that's the 1099 transaction detail report. And that's the one. What is that, Christine? What's the, okay, I'll just keep going.
Sorry, I couldn't get to my microphone because my mouse stopped working for a second. I was responding to Dawn's question. So no, we are not necessarily filing all the or putting all the information into QBO so we can do 1099s through QBO because we need to still make a firm decision about how we're handling these QuickBooks Direct ones, whether or not those are eventually going to e-file out of those programs or if we're going to start moving everything to 1099, et cetera. So that's a 2022 summer problem, as I mentioned in my note.
Okay, well, that regardless, that information still has to go in there in their vendor information.
Does it have to be in QBO if we're
Yes.
actually doing the 1099s and 1099, et cetera?
Yeah, in order to go through that wizard and print this summarized
Oh,
report.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
So yes, Dawn, we're putting it in there anyway, regardless.
Well, I mean, you could just use the transaction detail, the original report, but it's not going to show the addresses and everything like that, like she's mentioning. So you can still run the report like the detail report and can use that for everything. If you're using 1099, et cetera, that's how we've done it in prior years. But
Okay,
it just
then I
creates-
don't want us to take the extra time to put information into QBO that's already in 1099, et cetera. So unless it's a new vendor, we don't need that information because we're comparing these to last year also anyway. So we're already seeing that, yes, this is the information. And presumably if they had a change in address, then that's already been included in QBO when they got paid anyhow. Again, we're going back to as efficient as we can do. We don't want to add any extra work if we don't have to. So if we have everything we need in 1099, et cetera, we don't need it in QBO in order to get information in general as far as this is the vendor and the dollar amount, then we don't need to put that into QBO.
Okay, then maybe this final report for those who are in 1099, et cetera, won't be ran then. Because this final report is for being ran for the checkers. That includes the final amount, the tax ID, and the addition, all of the final information from that wizard.
Okay, so my question for you, I guess, Becca, is if their tax ID is not in there, does that mean that the wizard will not be able to recognize that this guy should get a 1099?
That's correct. Yes, you're right. It will not be able to recognize that.
Okay, we'll get back to everybody on this one too. Sorry. All right, go ahead and keep doing it for those that the information is in there at least, and I will circle back with everyone in the Teams channel to let you know what the procedure is going to be on what needs to get input into QBO.
Okay. All right, so you would run the 1099 transaction detail report, of course, running the dates for last year, cash, customize, change your columns. I believe that all of our columns are going to default to what we need them for. So you date, transaction date, number, memo description, 1099 box, account, split, amount, balance, and tax ID. Then our filters are going to be our vendor, and we're just going to select all. Our 1099 box, and that's just going to be all. And then our payment type, and that's just going to be all, and run report. And then you see it brings in just a summarized information for this vendor that you can print off for the checkers. You can even, well, it wouldn't show the tax ID, but this will be the summarized information for the, that you would want to print for them. Any questions on that?
Okay, I'm gonna take over one more time then for our last 3 minutes real quick. And just show that transfer to the 1096 and make a comment about printing out of 1099s, and then you guys can carry on with your day. Okay, so back into here. Transfer is the button you want to hit once you get all your 1099 information in. You will have to retransfer if you realize that you need to make changes to the 1099s. If it's affecting any dollar amounts, you need to omit some that you hadn't, or you need to add a new vendor, anything like that. You'll have to go through this transfer process again. Click OK. It kicks up a little box that says file imported, and then it also shows your 1096. So this should add up to all of your 1099s. So part of the process, the way I have it written out, is that you would probably want to print your 1099s first. And then you're going to want to do a tape just like we used to. So in your PDF, use your PDF calculator and run a tape of all the 1099s and a count as well, so that that way you can confirm as the preparer that the number of forms and the dollar amounts that are reported on the 1096 are accurate based on your count of that what's on your 1099. Any questions on how to do that transfer? It's one of those things that is incredibly simple, but sometimes we forget to do it. And then we're like, wait, why is this not working? Why is it not pulling all my information forward? You should never need to change anything on this 1096 directly, because you should have already checked everything beforehand, and it's just pulling the information over. So if something is wrong on here, if it's in the, the informational portion here where you're talking about the actual filer, then that's something that you should have, that needs to get fixed under the actual filer information. So it's correct going forward. It's correct on all the 1099s. If it's under the number of forms or the dollar amounts, that means you did something wrong when you were doing that 1099 originally, because that's why it didn't carry over correctly. The last comment I want to make, and I won't walk you through that just for time purposes, but when you go to print this, please print it as a PDF directly. And save the file as a PDF. There's a couple ways you can do it. One of them gives you a very grainy product that's a little difficult to read. One of them is nice and clean and beautiful. So let's go with the nice and clean and beautiful one because it just makes it much easier for everyone to be able to take a look at it. So any last minute questions? I know we're at noon and I appreciate you guys sticking with us. I know this was fast and furious and also a little disjointed, but I appreciate your time, and I'll have these resources out there. I strongly recommend, as Kendra said, that you read through the 1099 preparation packet before you actually do your first 1099 to make sure that you do better. Alan, good point. Thank you. So he said print to Adobe PDF works better than printing to the Microsoft PDF. Okay, any last minute questions? Okay, seeing nothing, I hope you all have a great lunch and we have an awesome January and 3 weeks and we're done. So it'll be fast and furious, and I appreciate all of your help in advance, and see you on the other side.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.